sound. So, hello, Rita.
Hello, Virginia.
I am so honored to be here in your home and to have met you at the Eureka Farmers Market.
And talk books.
Yes, and talk books. So you are, to me, a representative of a beautiful integration of several dreams of mine. You have a traveling bookstore in a van.
Yes.
And you call it a textual apothecary.
Right.
Yeah, which is... So why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself? Wherever you want to start, like how you came to have this textual apothecary, but also just some background, because the more time I spend around you, the more I sense you're like a pretty amazing person who's had some phenomenal experiences.
Well, yeah. So I'll start with the bookstore. So I like to read, and I had thought at some point I'd retire from my day job and open a bookstore in Eureka, Montana. But I took a course with the American Booksellers Association, and they quickly told me Eureka, Montana is too small to support an independent bookstore unless I happen to own a building on the main street, which
Already.
I don't.
Right.
So it's like, but I really, I just had this idea that I wanted the bookstore. And so talking with people came upon the idea of doing a traveling bookstore, which turns out to be a fantastic idea, and I'm surprised more people don't do it. There's somebody over in Wales called Dylan's Book Bus, and he does it. He had a brick and mortar bookstore, and then he decided to do a traveling bookstore in this bus, which is much bigger than my van, and he has more people helping him. I mean, usually it's me. Once in a while I'll have somebody else help me. But he corresponded with me and gave me ideas on like how to do it, and I don't know, that helped a lot. And I put out the word to people that I wanted to buy a used van that got good mileage and you could stand up in and wasn't hard to drive in city traffic. And I found my Sprinter, which was perfect.
Yes.
And then somebody designed the shelves, and I started asking people to donate books to get me started, and it just kept evolving. And I remember, I remember first having boxes of books and thinking, how do I organize these? And a friend came over and we got them all organized, and then it was like, well, which categories should go in the bookstore? That took a while to figure out. And then I started doing it just locally, at the farmers market or at festivals near Eureka, and did that. And then there was a festival in the Yak. So I saw there was a music festival, and I talked to Gwen and said, how about if I bring my traveling bookstore? And it always kind of takes a while to explain what it is, because
it's not a thing.
Right? It's
Why
pretty
not?
unusual. So she agreed, and then she was going to, being Gwen, who was wonderful, she said, well, this is how much I charge vendors. And I was like, I don't even know if I'll make any money driving up there for this festival, because it's a bookstore in the Yak, I don't know. And so we decided that I'd give her a percentage of whatever I made. It was fantastic. I made tons of money. I met lots of people, and one young couple I met, they were visiting from New York City and said, you should take your bookstore to the Brooklyn Book Festival in New York, and the next year I did that. So, it just keeps unfolding.
Yes.
It's like an onion or something. It's just somebody will say, oh, you should do this. It's like, that's a great idea. And then it happens, and it feels somewhat of course it's not effortless. I could, getting a blowout in North Dakota, or somebody buying a third of my inventory once when I was set up in Asheville, North Carolina. There have been moments that weren't the best, but I've done it for 7 years, and I will say it's wonderful. And I would recommend it to whoever really likes to talk to people and likes books.
Yes.
And likes to drive. You have to like to drive.
Right.
Because there's a lot of driving involved.
And so it's been sustainable for
Well,
you.
it's sustainable. Now, I will say, this is a disclaimer for people who think you're not going to get rich. Maybe you could get rich if you did it year round, 5 days a week. But I don't.
Right.
I don't do it in the winter. So in the winter, I'm here in Montana and I don't do it. So I do it from probably April through November. And I don't do it 5 days. I mean, when I'm on the road, I'll do it pretty much every day for maybe.
Where will you go? Because there aren't festivals every day, are there? Or
No, but I set up. Let me think of an example. So it's like when I go to Sheridan, Wyoming, I set up at a brewery.
Right.
When I go
Right.
to Sturgis, I set up at. I think it's called Red's Grill, and they have a big parking lot.
Right.
When I went through Sioux Falls, there was a restaurant there. I've set up by two cafes in Portland, Oregon, and at a typewriter repair store. I've set up at a brewery in Seattle. I set up at the Center for the Book in San Francisco, and also at Mission Pie in San Francisco. In Baltimore, I set up at the Baltimore Book Festival. In West Virginia, I set up at a music store. Basically, I just look online and find people that are central, I think get a lot of traffic, and have a parking lot.
Right.
And then I just ask them, can I bring my bookstore and set it up in your parking lot?
Right. And chances are, if they love to read,
Right.
they'll say yes.
Right. Well, if they just think it's unusual enough that it's like,
Right.
I'm not going to take up that much space, and
Right.
maybe I'll bring some customers or maybe not, but let's give it. And then there's certain places I go back to because they're so successful. So yeah, so I think at last count it was like 30 some states that I've been to with the bookstore over the last 7 years.
And I know when we first met, you said you were sort of afraid, like that how am I going to get inventory and people are going to have to hold books for me? And how has that kind of played out? I
always have books.
Yeah.
I know this is another part. I feel like some MBA student should be doing a study on this.
Maybe they'll see this video.
It's just like, wow, this is very different as a model. So at first I asked my friends and they gave me a bunch of books. And I just thought, well, eventually I'll have to buy books. But then people kept saying, so do you take books? Oh, yeah. So they would just leave them on my steps. And then when I'm on the road, people will say, where do you get your books? And it's like, well, people donate them. I'll be back. And so they'll come back. Did I tell you the story about getting lots of books?
I don't think so.
No. So this was in Asheville where it happened. A wonderful bookstore and champagne bar.
Ooh, count me in.
Exactly. So I was set up in Asheville. Somebody said, after you get off, like, and close your bookstore tonight, we should go to this champagne bar bookstore. I was definitely.
Yes.
When I was there, I met the owner, very nice person. The next day, he came to see my bookstore, my traveling bookstore, and he was like, wow, great prices and a really nice selection of books, because I really try to have
You have a
selection.
great selection.
Yeah. And he just said, I'm going to go get some boxes and buy some. And he bought probably a third of my inventory. And the next day, I was going to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was supposed to have a day off, and then the following day I was setting up in Raleigh at, I guess I was setting up at a brewery. But anyhow, I called my friend in Raleigh that I was supposed to stay with and said, I need books. And she's in a book club. So she said, I will ask people in my book club to bring you books if you will do like a talk for the book club. So when I got to Raleigh, they had so many books. I couldn't even fit them in my bookstore. I mean, we had to like do extra trips to give them away to libraries. But it like filled my bookstore. I gave a talk. They bought some book. I mean, it's like, it's not a typical business model.
Well, that's so beautiful. And like in a larger way too, you allow people to be part of that story. Like I bet all those women still tell that story. They get to become part of the story. It's meaningful.
Right.
And that's just so much more like stories are where the real value is, right? And in this just total soulless commodity culture, we lose that.
Right. Yeah. Because it's like I try to keep a balance. I definitely appreciate people donating books to me. One of the first days I had opened, so I have three prices. Paperbacks are one price, hardbacks are one price, and kids' books. I had divided into picture books and chapter books and kind of different. And somebody said, you really need to make kids' books affordable. So when kids are at a festival and their parents are like, here's a couple dollars, go, buy junk food or whatever.
Right.
It's like a book could be an option for them. So it's like, absolutely. So kids' books for the last 7 years have been $1. It doesn't matter if they're picture books, like nice ones, if chapter books, doesn't matter.
That is
$1. And so kids can really buy books, right? And so that makes it, I think that's nice for them because it's an alternative to junk food, and or things maybe they don't need. Like today kids bought books and they're so sweet. They just get so excited about it. So yeah, so I don't know. Could I be doing more? Probably, I don't know. But
it's about the balance, though.
Yeah.
Like when I met you in Libby, first of all, I saw the bookstore van, but also just seeing you, it was like this sort of peaceful presence. Like whatever that woman is doing with her life, like that seems like a good path to follow.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I really, for 7 years of doing this, I think it's gone very smoothly. I haven't, sometimes people with me, actually, I was pretty upset. I wasn't upset with the guy for buying all those books. I was just like thinking, what am I going to do? But there have been other times, the van breaks down and I had to cancel once. Where was I? I was supposed to be going from Wyoming to Denver to set up, and I had to cancel my thing in Denver because the van broke and it took a day to get it fixed. But I just meet so many wonderful people, and it's so nice to talk books and to have conversations about life.
Yes.
I think conversations are important. Civil discourse. That was one of the conversations today, was we need more civil discourse. And I'd like to think that my bookstore offers that.
Well, it absolutely does, because you have that, I don't know, I can't remember if it's a blackboard or a whiteboard, but that says books, conversation. And literally, it's like you're set up for that. That's part of what you're offering. And then you have your typewriter.
Right.
So what's up with the typewriter?
Well, that came from Dylan's book bus in Wales, because he had a typewriter. And so I thought, okay. And I'd watch, he'd post pictures on social media. So I thought, well, that's a very good idea, because it encourages writing.
Yes.
And it's also such a gimmick for kids, right? Most kids have never tried a typewriter, so that's a fun thing. So I asked around. Somebody had a typewriter. It didn't work. They gave it to me. I found a fantastic, this guy is incredible, typewriter repair person in Portland, Oregon, Ace Typewriter. Matt is his name. And so the next time I was down there, I took the typewriter and he got it working. And now since then, I've had multiple typewriters, and I take them to Matt when I'm going through Portland, and he fixes them. And so usually I have two that I can trade out, because sometimes little children get very carried away, and it's good to have a second typewriter. But today this person, and I don't know where he was from. He was Asian, and he was like, how do you work this? And so I showed him how to do it. He was a young person, and he had never tried a typewriter before.
Right. Do you actually remember, did you actually use typewriters in your...
Yes.
Yeah. No, but that's kind of a cool, it's not like your lifespan has been that long, and within your lifespan, you had this time where you really used typewriters, and now you're seeing people that are like, what is this thing?
It? Right, or how do you do it? Or one time this one little kid said, but how do you charge it? It's like, you don't charge it.
That is so
you
funny.
You just get to type. So, yeah, I like having the typewriter. And, so that's just something. For a while, I had a theremin. You know what a theremin is?
I don't think so.
So it's a musical instrument that you don't touch. So it's a box, and it has two antennae that put out electromagnetic waves. And by moving your hand, you make the sound. And a nice theremin can play up to 5 octaves, and it's just like how you move your fingers in, like very gently, produces the different notes, and then the other antenna is for volume. You really have to look, I'm sorry, you really have to look this up.
I really will.
Yes, it's such an interesting instrument, and it was invented by this Russian. Anyhow,
what happened to yours? How can you not still have it?
Because it just wasn't something that I could figure out how to play. I could make sounds, and mostly what I would do is set it up, like the typewriter. I would set it up, people would be like, wow, what's that? It's a theremin. And I could tell them the story, and you know, like if you just move your hand without knowing, it makes these odd sounds, and people would, you know, get into that a little bit, but I felt like it didn't really show the theremin, like what it could do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't need extra things in my van.
No.
So I ended up selling it. Yes.
Well, but that's just so cool too. Like now one is gonna come somewhere on my path now that I know.
Right. Because, and I wrote to the in the U.S. they're made by Moog, like Moog synthesizers. They also make theremins. And so I had written to them to say, this may be the only theremin that's out in the public for people to use and is solar powered, because I have solar panels on my van.
Right.
And they were like, well, that's really cool. And they did like a little, they posted it or something. And they said, if you ever get to where their factory is in North Carolina, you should stop by. It's like, I will set up my bookstore there. So I did.
Actually, yeah, I'll do that.
So yeah, no. So that was.
That is.
I know. I could. There's so many bookstore stories. I mean, it could be a full-length feature.
Right, right. Well, and I mean, a big piece of just that's intrinsic to the structure of what you do also is community, in the way that because your van is full of books, you always stay with other people, right? Rather than living in your van. Right. And then all of these people being willing to let you set up in there. I mean, that's really beautiful. Right.
Yeah. I sleep in the van when I go to the Yak because there's really no other place to stay. So I do sleep in my van when I go to the Yak. And once in a while, if I'm on a long trip, if I need a nap, I will go into a rest area and take a nap in the back of the van. But yeah, I'm going to say 99% of the time I don't stay in the van. I stay with people, friends, or people that I've made connections with. So yeah,
right.
So that is very good too, and people get very excited about having the bookstore visit. Well, and I have to have safe places to park it. You know, so when I'm in urban areas, I want to be able to park it someplace that it's not blocking driveways or stuff like that.
Right.
And so it's often I'm saying to people, well, there's me. I need a place to sleep, but I also need a place to park my van. So do you have a driveway or a dedicated parking spot that I could set up in?
Right.
You know.
So have you, I mean, just has a theme for this, from this experience for you, been just this sense of givingness that people have, and sort of this like...
Maybe it's growth.
Yes.
You know, it's definitely growth for me.
Yes.
I mean, I can remember like, oh, I'm here in Eureka. All right, now I can figure out how to drive this van. And now I'm going to take it to the Yak. Well, the Yak really only takes about an hour and a half. But it's a twisty road. It's going over like a mountain. And you don't really pass other cars. And so I'm driving my van and really worried, like, oh, the road is narrow, and what happens, and what I can remember that as my first drive out of this little community,
out of the nest,
right? And then it was just like, okay. And then the next year, I met the people that said go to the Brooklyn Book Festival, and they accepted my van, and they were like, yeah, we'll put you with the food trucks. It's like, not a problem. I'm fine with that. And a friend from the Czech Republic came over, and she said, I'll drive with you to New York. And I was like, well, that's great, but I think we both need to practice before we get to New York. So we decided to take the bookstore down to Portland, Oregon, and try driving in a city and setting it up on city streets there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Because that's intimidating, New York.
It was, yes, that was very intimidating, driving through the city the first time. So but I felt like I definitely grew from it, right? It's like, well, first I went to the Yak, now I'm going to Portland, and then I'm going to go to New York. And so it just kind of kept growing with me. And I like to think that businesses and individuals grow when I contact them and say, I have a traveling bookstore. And they're like, could you send pictures? Like,
we're going to need to see this.
Well, can you tell me more about it? Well, yeah, here's some articles, here's my social media. And yeah, that would be great, you know? And so I think it kind of opens people's minds to like what the possibilities are.
Yes.
And yeah, because it's new. I mean, most people haven't seen a traveling bookstore.
No, I think it's about to become a thing though.
Really?
It's definitely becoming a thing in my life.
Perfect. Yeah.
So do you write as well?
I do. So I have a blog.
Okay.
Yeah. So
which we will link to in the About section.
Yeah. So I write about the bookstore during the winter when actually I have more time to write. I will write about experiences and then recommend books.
Oh,
so,
I love that.
Yeah, I always had hesitated to recommend books to people because it's so hard to know what people will really like. But it's like, here's my theme.
Right.
Civil disobedience.
Yes.
And I'm going to talk about that in my blog. And then I'm going to suggest 5 books that I think are really good about civil disobedience.
Yes.
You know, or so that's the type of thing that I'll put out. So it's just like, or making your own books, right? I mean, this is the thing I really like too. Like, yes, it's great to buy books and read books.
Yes.
But how about making your own book?
Yes.
And what's involved with that? And it's not necessary for you to take a 2-year course on bookbinding. There are really simple ways to make books. And so here's some books that explain how to make books.
Ooh.
So, yeah. So
I really like that idea. I'm like, the wheels are turning. Well, because I've been inspired by some connections that I've made over the past couple years, that it's becoming a lot easier to start your own publishing house. And meeting some women that are doing that. And I love the idea of, you know, having some agency over the stories that get told, basically.
Right. No, and it's wonderful. And kind of lets more voices be heard.
Exactly. That aren't, and that maybe don't fit into, you know, and not that there's not a myriad of different voices that get published by major publishing houses now, but still, you know, there's a very certain kind of standard that I feel like those editors have. And, you know, everybody has a story to tell and does it in their own kind of way. So.
And I think too, I think this with my bookstore, this goes back. So I would say there's probably people out there that could figure out how to make a traveling bookstore make money.
Right.
Really,
if that was their goal.
If that was their goal. I feel like the bookstore kind of supports itself and I support myself.
Yes.
Right? So the bookstore will pay for gas, insurance, tires, fees if I'm going to a festival that has a fee. So it kind of covers all of its expenses, and the overhead is very low because I get the books, and it does get good mileage. And then I pay for myself, so it's like I pay for my food, and I find lodging, or if I have to stay in a hotel, then I stay in a hotel. Sometimes on longer trips, but so it's like that. So it's not a big money maker. It's not Amazon. But I think this with publishers too. It's not like, is this a book that would make money? I'm sure
exactly.
That's
what they think about.
So
yes.
It's like, let's think of it in a different paradigm.
Yes.
Maybe this is a book that's just good to get out to people.
Yes.
Maybe this is a book that has something that needs to be said.
Yes.
You know? And so it can't be just about making money.
Right. And I mean, you know, this idea of needing to make like buku bucks anyway, it's just like, what if you had a publishing company that just sustained you, you know? And I mean, that's enough, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Or like the Patreon, is that like
yeah, that's
that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically the model that I'm using with my creative works is just like, if you're getting value from this, like, you know, I'm not trying to like get big, but like if I could just keep living like in storytelling, that would be awesome.
Right.
So, yeah, what would you say, I mean, what do you hope that the legacy that this is leaving is, I guess? I know that's kind of a big question.
Yeah, I guess I would say to encourage other people to find ways to realize a dream.
Yes.
Right? So it's like I had it, I'm going to open a brick and mortar bookstore in my town. No, that's probably not a great idea. So how can I have a bookstore and still have it be viable?
Yes.
And it's happening.
Yes.
Right? It's happening. I mean, I could do this bookstore a lot. Unfortunately, I'm really connected to my community, so I like being here for a lot of things. But if I didn't want to be here doing things in this community so much, I could be on the road easily 7-8 months out of the year.
Right.
Because there's just so many places to go.
Right.
So anyhow, so that's I just think setting a goal and then figuring out how to achieve it, and not feeling like, it's got to look like this. It's got to look like a building with a front door, you know, and like a cashier. I mean, just like how we think of bookstores. And I love bookstores. I mean, I can tell you so many bookstores I've gone to as I've traveled, but it's like bookstores can look like my van also.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And the other thing that I love that you're doing is it's all recycled. I mean, they're all used books.
Right.
Like these are already beautiful stories out there in circulation that maybe just needed that little new wave to find new life. Like that's amazing.
Right.
And that's becoming, there's a lot more consciousness coming around that in a lot of different spheres with thrift stores and slow fashion and all of these things. But like, new trees aren't being cut down to publish the books that you're selling, which I think is pretty cool.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I guess, I mean, to maybe wind this up, what are some books related? Well, just whatever comes to heart, whether it's related to this or just... Okay, and on the theme of this conversation, if it was a blog, what are some books that you might recommend?
I know this is always somebody.
I hate to put you on the spot like that.
Well, it does put me on the spot because mostly I just think of ones that I've read recently that like Girl, Woman, Other. And that is it's a novel. It won the Booker Prize a couple years ago, I guess. Yeah,
I definitely heard about that. Girl, Woman, Other. Okay.
Yeah. Gentleman from Moscow.
Yes. My mom told me to read that. I haven't read it yet.
And unfortunately, I don't have The Plover. Now, this is Brian Doyle.
Plover's like the bird?
Yeah. And he was an author. Well, Brian Doyle was an author out of Oregon and died too young, but has written some wonderful books, and The Plover is one of my favorites.
Okay.
So so that's out there. Stella Luna. That's an older children's book, but it's so wonderful about bats.
Stella Luna is one of my favorite books. Like my older brother and I were like absolutely obsessed with that book when we were growing up. Like, yes.
I can't even tell you how many copies of that I have bought over the years because I keep saying to people, "You haven't read Stella Luna?" Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, no, that book is like that's a heart one for sure.
And The Arabulis of Liberty Street. Did you read that one?
No.
That was about the same time that Stella Luna came out.
Wait, what is it called?
It's called The Arabulis of Liberty Street.
Okay, so, I'm gonna have to find that.
Yeah, that's their 7 o'clock siren.
Why?
Well, they say it's to make sure that the siren's working.
They do that every night at 7 o'clock?
Yes.
That is a small town Montana. Hey.
Yes, it used to be they did it later for people, like a curfew, like, now this is when all young people should be home or something. And then there's like, well, we don't really need to do it that late. Let's just do it at 7 and families can figure out.
They're doing it at like 11 p.m. We're waking people up. We need to stop.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Well, it's been just phenomenal to chat with you and get to become part of your story. You're becoming part of mine. Who knows who else will get to experience this story. And I think that interweaving of stories is one way that I think about community.
and I'm going to hold the community thought and say, I will help anybody. Like if
Yes.
someone wants to know, well, what about your bookshelves? Or how did you figure out how much storage? Or how do you do this? Or what about sales tax? I mean, I will tell people anything, any experience I have, I'm willing to share with people because I'd love to have more traveling bookstores. I mean, I had this vision of like us all gathering for
Yes, and imagine that festival.
I know.
Oh, that would be so fun.
Right.
Yes.
But I have yet to. I mean, So Ann Patchett,
Mm-hmm.
the author, has a brick and mortar bookstore in Nashville,
Oh.
and she has a van called Pegasus that goes out, but just around Nashville.
Right.
And then there was one called 21 Stories. They started in LA, but just did LA, and now I think they've actually moved to Rhode Island, but I'm pretty sure they've changed over to a brick and mortar bookstore. There's somebody up in Canada that does it, but she pretty much just does it around Edmonton.
Okay.
And she's expanded to Calgary, but it's not. It's just different. And then there's somebody, and I'm not sure. Maybe she's in South Carolina, called Go Go Books, and she has a van that's beautiful, decked out with books, mostly children's books, and new books, I think.
Okay.
But she just stays in that area. So I'm the only bookstore I know of that truly travels.
Right.
And that's what I want, to meet more people
Yes.
that would be inspired to do that. And young people, I mean, really, if I'm doing this, I'm telling you, young people would have like no problem.
Yes. Well, that's, so
And
you're offering yourself as a resource.
Yes, I am. And I will say, and I'm going to go back to the community because I think community is so important, and we really need to cherish it and nurture it, right? We need to help our communities grow. And people define, like I can define my community as Eureka, Montana, although it's actually bigger, right? When I'm out on the road, and especially when I go back to places.
Right.
You probably define your community differently because you live in a van, so it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So it's just, but I think being aware of who your community is or what your community is.
Yes.
And then how are you giving as well as receiving from it?
Yes. I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass right now, which how am I just, like, I've been told to read that so many times, but now I'm like getting close to the end and I'm like, I don't want to finish it. But that idea of reciprocity and just, I have been thinking about that a lot, and I think that that's really important in community because the more we become conscious of our community, the more we become conscious of the blessings, and then it's like, okay, well, what am I bringing?
Right.
Because I'm receiving so much.
Right. Well, and that I feel like that a lot. You know, it's just like so grateful.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so what can I give now that I have the capacity for? So. Yeah.
Stories. That's
Yes.
one thing. That's definitely one thing. So, well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to share this, and hopefully I think it would be a beautiful full circle if someone who sees this on the internet meets you at your bookstore in real life.
Like,
That's when we'll know that
Right.
everything's come full circle.
Okay, I've decided to open a bookstore.
Yes, in there, they're like, yeah, and then they're like, will you help me build the shelves? So
I will give you the blueprints.
yeah. Okay,
Yes.
Amazing. Well,
okay, thank you so much.
thank you. Let's hope that all went well. That's what we like to see. Still recording.